She stood by the door in her cheap uniform. The billionaire's son mocked her. Then 5 masked gunmen burst into the Gala to steal a priceless diamond tiara. What they didn't know? The woman they ignored was Gunnery Sergeant Kaylin Vance, a combat-hardened U.S. Marine, and her former commanding officer, Marcus Thorne, knew the robbers had just made their final mistake. A pause before we continue. Tell us, where in the world are you watching? If you like these stories, be sure to hit that subscribe button to get the earliest notifications of new ones. A crisp September breeze swept through the canyons of Manhattan, carrying the distant scent of rain and the ceaseless energy of a city that never slept. Below the darkening sky, the lights of New York City began to glitter, a constellation of ambition laid out on a grid of steel and concrete. On the 70th floor of the Sterling Legacy Tower, however, the outside world was a muted spectacle, a silent film playing beyond soundproof, floor-to-ceiling windows. Inside the grand ballroom, the air was thick with the cloying sweetness of expensive perfumes and the palpable weight of self-satisfaction. It was an environment Gunnery Sergeant Kaylin Vance was uniquely unsuited for, which made her the perfect person for the job. She stood at her post by a secondary service corridor, a ghost in a cheap, ill-fitting security uniform. The polyester blazer was too tight across her toned shoulders, a constant irritating reminder of the charade. At 32, Kaylin possessed a stillness that was often mistaken for apathy. Her slate-gray eyes, sharp and analytical, missed nothing. Her dark brown hair was pulled back into a severe, regulation-tight bun, emphasizing a strong jawline and features that were handsome rather than pretty. There was an economy to her every movement, a product of years spent in the unforgiving landscapes of the Hellman province. This gilded cage was a world away from the dust and adrenaline she was used to. She was on mandatory administrative leave. The official report was vague, but the memory was seared into her mind with brutal clarity. A split-second decision during a firefight in a sun-baked Afghan village, a call that had led to her corporal, a good kid named Martinez, taking a round to the leg. He would walk again, but the limp would be a permanent souvenir of her command. The guilt was a cold, heavy stone in her gut. This job, a favor for her old CO, was meant to be a quiet place to recalibrate, to prove to the brass, and more importantly, to herself, that she could still function, that the sharp edges of her training hadn't been irrevocably dulled by trauma. But the superficiality of this world grated on her. The casual, thoughtless cruelty of the guests was a different kind of warfare, one fought with dismissive glances and cutting whispers. "Look at her!" A voice like cracking ice remarked nearby. Kaylin's eyes flicked sideways without moving her head. The speaker was Beatrice de la Roche, a woman in her late 40s, whose face was a testament to the finest cosmetic surgeons in the city. She was rail-thin in a shimmering silver dress, her blonde hair sculpted into an elaborate updo. Her entire existence seemed dedicated to observing and judging others, a social predator who thrived on perceived weakness. Honestly, you'd think Sterling Legacy could afford security that doesn't look like they're mourning their own funeral. A ripple of cruel laughter followed. Kaylin's expression remained unchanged, a mask of professional indifference she had perfected long ago. Just then, the heir to the empire, Julian Sterling Jr., approached. In his early 30s, Julian was handsome in a way that suggested good genes and zero hardship. His custom-tailored suit probably cost more than her monthly salary, and his perfectly styled hair didn't dare move a millimeter. He carried himself with the unshakable confidence of a man who had never been told no. He stopped directly in front of Kaylin, his friend smirking behind him. He looked her up and down, his lip curling in disgust. You're blocking my view of the champagne bar. Move aside," he commanded, his voice dripping with condescension. "And for God's sake, try to smile. Is your job to provide security or to frighten the guests with that grim expression?" Kaylin executed the smallest possible sidestep, an efficient, precise motion. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice perfectly level, devoid of the anger that tightened in her chest. The utter lack of reaction seemed to annoy him more than any argument would have. He scoffed, turned on his heel, and swaggered away. A warm, gravelly voice crackled almost imperceptibly in her earpiece. "How's it holding up, Gunny?" It was Marcus Thorne, her former colonel, now the head of security for Sterling Legacy. He was a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, with a kind face and the weary eyes of a career soldier. He was the only reason she was here, the only one who knew the formidable warrior hidden inside the cheap uniform. "Don't let the princelings get to you. Consider it patience training." "Copy, Colonel. Just another day at the office," she murmured, her lips barely moving. His trust was her only anchor in this sea of vanity. As the crowd's chatter continued, a young waiter named Leo approached her cautiously. He couldn't have been more than 20, with a shock of messy black hair and a kind, open face. His uniform was slightly frayed at the cuffs, but his smile was genuine. "You look like you could use this," he said quietly, offering her a glass of water. "It's going to be a long night." The simple act of kindness was so unexpected it almost broke her composure. "Thank you," Kaylin said, accepting the glass with a small nod of gratitude. It was a brief, human moment, a stark contrast to the hollow glamour surrounding them. Suddenly, the ballroom lights dimmed, drawing a collective gasp from the audience. A single spotlight illuminated the stage, where Julian Sterling Sr. stood beside a velvet-draped pedestal. The moment had arrived. With a flourish, the velvet was pulled away, revealing the Elysian star. It was breathtaking, a crown of intricately woven platinum and brilliant blue diamonds that seemed to drink the light. The crowd fell into a hushed, reverent silence. But Kaylin wasn't looking at the crown. Her senses, honed by years of imminent danger, screamed that something was wrong. It was the silence behind the silence, a profound lack of ambient, all noise from the supposedly secure corridor behind her. Then she saw it, a flicker of movement in her periphery, a shadow that was there and then gone. Her blood ran cold. The premonition barely had time to form before it was validated by violence. The grand oak doors at the far end of the ballroom burst inward with explosive force, slamming against the marble walls. 5 figures, clad head to toe in black tactical gear, flowed into the room like a deathly tide. They moved with a chilling, synchronized efficiency that spoke of countless hours of training. Their faces were obscured by black, ballistic masks, rendering them anonymous and terrifying agents of chaos. The leader, a broad-shouldered man who moved with the predatory grace of a panther, raised his SR-25 rifle. This was Spectre. His presence radiated a cold, absolute authority that froze the screams in the guests' throats. He didn't shout. His voice, filtered through the mask's comm unit, was a low, menacing rasp that cut through the sudden silence. But before he spoke, one of his men unclipped a small cylinder from his vest and tossed it into the center of the room. Kaylin's training screamed a single word: flash bang. While the guests stared, mesmerized by the innocuous object skittering across the floor, Kaylin was already reacting. She snapped her eyes shut, turned her head toward the wall, and took a sharp breath, holding it. The detonation was a sunburst of blinding white light and a deafening crack that vibrated through the floor and up her spine. The room erupted into pandemonium. Shrieks and cries of pain tore through the air as the disoriented guests stumbled, their vision and hearing stolen. This was the moment the attackers seized. "On the floor!" "Now!" Spectre's voice boomed, and this time, everyone complied. The glittering facade of high society crumbled into a terrified, sobbing heap on the marble. Kaylin, blinking away the lingering spots in her vision, allowed herself to be herded down with the others, her movements deliberately clumsy, making herself small and insignificant. One of the intruders, a wiry man carrying a hardened laptop, knelt by a wall panel, his fingers flying across the keyboard. A series of clicks echoed, and the emergency lights flickered before settling into a dim, ominous crimson glow. The heavy magnetic locks on all exits slammed shut with a final, doom-laden thud. The ballroom was now a cage. From her position on the floor, Kaylin scanned the room, her mind a cold, calculating machine. The adrenaline was a familiar cold fire in her veins, burning away the last vestiges of her self-doubt and the ghosts of Afghanistan. The scent of ozone and cordite was a perverse homecoming. The gunny was back in command. Her eyes cataloged the reactions. She saw Julian Sterling Jr. scrambling under a table laden with hors d'oeuvres, his expensive suit now wrinkled and stained. The arrogant air was gone, replaced by a whimpering coward muttering, My father will pay. Anything. Just take the money. Not far from him, Beatrice de la Roche was a mess of raw panic, her carefully constructed mask of superiority shattered, revealing the terrified woman beneath. She was sobbing hysterically, her hands clawing at her sculpted hair. Then, Kaylin's gaze found Leo. The young waiter, his face pale but his eyes resolute, was not hiding. He was actively shielding an elderly couple, urging them behind the relative safety of the thick mahogany bar. The man, probably in his 80s, held his wife close, his frail body a trembling shield. Leo's quiet courage was a small beacon in the overwhelming darkness. A frantic voice buzzed in her ear. It was Marcus. "Kaylin, they've initiated a full network lockdown. It's a professional crew. Red code. I'm locked out of the primary controls. You're the only asset inside. Do not engage. I repeat, do not." The transmission dissolved into a burst of harsh static. The tech expert had severed all outside communication. A profound silence fell in her ear, a silence more terrifying than the screams. She was utterly, completely alone. Her lifeline was cut. The intruders moved with purpose, ignoring the weeping guests as they focused on the stage. They also ignored the nondescript female security guard lying amongst the terrified civilians. Her cheap uniform was the perfect camouflage. In their eyes, she was nothing, a non-threat, part of the scenery. It was a fatal miscalculation. Kaylin's mind was no longer in a ballroom. It was mapping a battle space. 5 hostiles, disciplined, well-equipped, 1 tech expert, 1 heavy breacher, 2 riflemen, and a commander, Spectre. Her eyes drifted again to the mahogany bar, to the small service door hidden in the shadows behind it, where Leo and the elderly couple were huddled. It was a potential exit, a choke point, a tactical opportunity. The game had changed, and she was the only one who knew the new rules. Spectre gestured with the barrel of his rifle. "Breach and tech, get to work. Patrol, keep an eye on our guests. No heroes." The 2 men designated for the crown moved toward the stage, one carrying a heavy toolkit, the other a compact drill. The third, Patrol, began a slow, arrogant circuit around the huddled hostages. He was younger than the others, with a cocksure swagger that identified him as the weak link in the chain. Overconfidence was an exploitable flaw. As his route took him past the mahogany bar, Kaylin began to move. She didn't rise. She flowed across the floor, a shadow moving between other shadows, using the huddled forms of the guests as cover. Her movements were so fluid and silent that even the people she passed were unaware. Leo, still crouched behind the bar with the elderly couple, saw her coming. His eyes widened in terror and awe, but he had the sense to remain perfectly still. Patrol stopped near the end of the bar to survey the room, his back exposed for a critical second. That was all Kaylin needed. She rose up behind him in one seamless motion. Her left hand clamped over his mouth, stifling his surprised grunt, while her right hand, gripping a heavy unopened bottle of Bordeaux, swung in a tight, vicious arc. The bottle connected with his temple with a sickening thud. His eyes rolled back, and his body went limp. Kaylin lowered him silently to the floor, caught his rifle before it could clatter, and dragged him completely out of sight. With practiced efficiency, she relieved him of his zip ties and secured his hands and feet, gagging him with a bar towel. The entire sequence took less than 5 seconds. She looked at Leo, put a single finger to her lips, and his terrified nod was all the confirmation she needed. On stage, a high-pitched whine filled the air as the drill bit into the display case, followed by a frustrated curse. "This is no good," the tech expert growled. "It's multi-layered composite security glass. We'll need a charge." Spectre's head snapped toward him. "Then use it. We're burning time." The sight of the other man pulling a small, brick-like object from his pack, a shaped C4 charge, sent a fresh wave of terror through the hostages. For Kaylin, it triggered something else entirely. The image flickered in her mind, sharp and unwelcome. The glint of the sun off a pressure plate wire half buried in the Kandahar dust. The plume of dirt and smoke. The sharp, agonized cry of Corporal Martinez. A mistake. Her mistake. A cold resolve settled over her, hardening her features into a mask of pure determination. Not again, she thought. No one gets hurt on my watch. Not again. It was this resolve that was shattered by Julian Sterling Jr.'s panicked shriek. No! Don't! My father will pay you anything. Anything you want, he cried, scrambling to his feet. Just don't scratch the glass. His idiotic, self-serving plea drew every eye in the room, including Spectre's. The leader turned slowly, an aura of lethal menace radiating from him. A hero, he said, his voice dangerously soft. He raised his rifle, not at Julian, but at the easiest target next to him. Beatrice de la Roche. Sit down, now, or your lady friend's silver dress gets a new red accessory. Beatrice let out a choked sob, her eyes wide with terror. Julian froze, his foolish bravado evaporating, finally understanding the deadly consequences of his actions. Kaylin knew she had only a fraction of a second. Her eyes darted around, landing on a discarded silver serving tray. Without a second thought, she grabbed it and flung it with all her strength against the far wall. The tray hit with a deafening clang, echoing like a gunshot in the tense room. For a heartbeat, every hostile, including Spectre, flinched and turned toward the sound. In that sliver of time, Kaylin moved like a viper, covering the distance to Julian in 2 quick strides. She grabbed the back of his suit jacket and yanked him brutally back down to the floor. You move again. You breathe too loud, she whispered, her voice a venomous hiss directly in his ear. And I will break your arm. Stay down. Julian, trembling and utterly cowed, could only nod, his eyes now fixed on the female guard he had mocked with a new terrified respect. Her action, however, had not gone unnoticed. Whispers rippled through the nearby hostages. Did you see that? Who is she? Her camouflage of mediocrity was beginning to tear. She was now in a new position, dangerously exposed, but closer to her goal. She caught Leo's eye again and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod toward a stack of dessert plates on a nearby trolley. Understanding dawned on the young waiter's face. He took a shaky breath, then shoved the trolley. The plates crashed to the floor in a cascade of shattering porcelain. The secondary diversion gave Kaylin the cover she needed to slip behind a marble pillar, placing her within reach of the fire alarm system. The gambit was almost complete, but the cost was her anonymity. Spectre turned from the noise, his eyes scanning the chaos, his helmeted head tilting. His man was missing. The rich fool had been silenced by the security guard. He ignored the stage, ignored the hostages, and began to stride purposefully toward the marble pillar, toward Kaylin. He stopped a few feet away, his rifle held low. The suspicion in his voice was thick and deadly. The quiet little guard, he mused, his voice a low growl. You're not on my manifest. You are not normal. He raised his head slightly. Who are you? Kaylin met Spectre's question not with an answer, but with an action that was faster than his thought. As his mouth formed the command, "Killer," her hand, already in position, slammed down on the fire alarm lever. The world erupted. A deafening alarm blared, and strobe lights began to flash, turning the chaotic scene into a series of disjointed, hellish snapshots. Simultaneously, the ceiling sprinklers burst to life, unleashing a torrential downpour of icy water that soaked everything and everyone in seconds. The sudden sensory overload was a weapon, and Kaylin wielded it with expert precision. While Spectre's men were momentarily blinded and disoriented, she was in her element. The chaos was her camouflage. The 2 men on the stage turned from the display case, their rifles raised uncertainly into the artificial storm. That was their mistake. Kaylin moved through the screaming, scattering guests, using the panic as a smokescreen. She reached the stage from the side, her soft-soled shoes silent on the now treacherous marble. The tech expert was the first to fall. A swift, brutal kick to the side of his knee buckled his leg with an audible crack, and a follow-up strike with her elbow to the back of his neck sent him crashing face first into the floor. The second man, the breacher, spun around, but the slick floor betrayed him. As he struggled for footing, Kaylin was on him, disarming him with a precise wrist lock that sent his rifle skittering away and finishing with a chokehold that rendered him unconscious in moments. Fall back! Forget the crown! Fall back! Spectre roared in fury, realizing his meticulously planned operation had been single-handedly dismantled. He turned to run for the main entrance, the only viable exit, only to find his path blocked. Kaelin stood there, a drenched and formidable silhouette against the strobing red emergency lights. Her cheap uniform was torn, her hair had come loose, but her eyes burned with an intensity that made the hardened mercenary pause. "You're not going anywhere," she stated, her voice calm and steady amidst the cacophony. He charged, a roar of pure rage erupting from his throat. He was bigger, stronger, a bull of a man fueled by fury. He swung a haymaker that would have crushed a normal person. But Kaelin wasn't normal. She ducked under the blow, the force of his miss spinning him slightly off balance. She used his momentum, driving her shoulder into his midsection, and using a leg sweep to send him crashing to the flooded floor. He was up in an instant, lashing out with a powerful kick. She absorbed part of the blow on her forearm, a flare of pain shooting up her arm, but she gritted her teeth and closed the distance. It was a brutal, desperate dance on the slick marble. He was pure force. She was pure technique. He managed to grab her, his powerful hands like vices, but she twisted, using leverage and a pressure point under his jaw to break his grip. As he staggered back, she saw her, opening and took it, locking him in a rear-naked chokehold from behind. Her legs scissored around his torso to control his body. He thrashed wildly, but her grip was like iron. Just as his struggles began to weaken, the main doors exploded inward for the second time that night. A full SWAT team, clad in heavy armor and brandishing rifles, poured into the room, expecting a firefight. They froze, confronted with a surreal tableau, 4 hostiles down, and their leader being methodically subdued by a lone woman in a soaked security guard's uniform. Marcus Thorne was right behind them, his face a mask of worry that melted into profound relief. As the SWAT team secured the now unconscious Spectre, Marcus rushed to Kaelin's side. He ignored the gawking, shivering guests and the chaos, his eyes only on her. The alarms were silenced, and a strange quiet fell over the room. Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice echoing in the sudden stillness, full of pride and authority. "Everyone," he announced, his voice cutting through the shock. "Your lives were just saved by Gunnery Sergeant Kaelin Vance of the United States Marine Corps." The revelation hit the room with the force of a physical blow. Julian Sterling Jr., who had been helped to his feet, stared at Kaelin, his face cycling through confusion, dawning comprehension, and finally, a deep burning shame that made him look away. Beatrice de la Roche simply stood, dripping and broken, unable to meet the eyes of the woman she had so casually ridiculed. The truth was more damning than any accusation. Later, as paramedics tended to the guests, Julian's father, a distinguished man with graying temples, approached Kaelin. "Sergeant," he began, his voice heavy with gratitude, "our family, my company, is in your debt. A reward, a position as head of security, anything you want." Kaelin simply shook her head. "I was just doing my job, sir." Her gaze drifted across the room and met the eyes of Leo, who was helping the elderly couple he had sheltered. He gave her a small, respectful nod, a look of pure, unadulterated admiration. Kaelin returned the nod. That was the only reward she needed. A quiet voice in her mind, a voice that had been haunted for months, finally found peace. "We're even, Martinez." Her mission was complete. Kaelin's story teaches us a powerful lesson. Strength doesn't always roar. It often resides quietly in the hearts of those we overlook, waiting for a moment to reveal itself. The person deemed least important in that room became the savior of all. Her uniform was not one of wealth or status, but of service and sacrifice, hidden in plain sight. Some might say it was a miracle that she was there that night. And perhaps it was. Sometimes a miracle isn't a parting of the seas or a flash of light from the heavens. Sometimes a miracle is the right person, with a God-given spirit and diligently honed skills, being placed in the right room at the exact moment of greatest need. It is a reminder that God often works through the hands of quiet, courageous people He places among us. In our own lives, we encounter these potential heroes every day. They are the patient teacher, the tireless nurse, the honest friend. They are the people who show strength not with weapons, but with integrity, compassion, and resilience. This story calls us to look beyond the surface, to value the quiet strength in others, and to recognize the potential for courage that lies within each of us. If this story of hidden strength and quiet courage resonated with you, please help us share it. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded of their own inner power. Leave a comment below and tell us about a time you witnessed unexpected heroism in your daily life. And please subscribe to our channel for more stories that uplift and inspire. Thank you for watching. May God bless you and your loved ones, and may He always place a guardian on your path when you need one most.